I love listening to podcasts, and I've gotten super into movie podcasts. And one of the companies that I've been keeping an eye out for is The Ringer, because I love all their podcasts. But one of the ones that I've started watching recently is the Rewatchables. The premise is that it's movies that you want to watch over and over again. But after they started working with Netflix, is that it's movies that are on Netflix, podcasts hosted on Netflix, and you get to watch them. So that's been an experiment that they've been running for the past, like, I think it's been like 3 months now. It's basically has gotten like bigger and bigger productions as, it's gotten more popularity. But I think what they're doing more, importantly and more interestingly, is going after bigger stars to be on the podcast, as guests. And so we're, finding that a bunch of like celebrities and celebrity directors who have never been on podcasts before are going onto these podcasts. Leonardo DiCaprio went on to The Big Picture, which was like super interesting. But I think what I found most interesting was how he would talk about being in the movie industry, what it was like for him, how he gets involved with the directors, his special relationship with Martin Scorsese. And that's just what happened with Steven Spielberg as well, where he was on The Big Picture. They did like an episode at like South by Southwest. And then he joined Bill Simmons and Sean Fennessy on the Rewatchables for the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. And you just kind of, have him kind of nerding out with these two guys who like really love movies. And I think it was the first time that listened to Steven Spielberg just like dive deep about not just his movies, like talking about E.T. and Close Encounters and just all the movies he's like made, but then it comes to light that he had a really like interesting relationship with Stanley Kubrick, who he admired, but he also kind of developed a friendship. So he just gave us like really cool insights into 2001: Space Odyssey that we'd never like really heard before. And I think that brings me around to like how podcasts as a medium are changing the type of content that is available to like people that really like nerding out about specific topics. There's just so much more possible when you dive deep into topics with people that really know what they're talking about. So, Visa,
Yeah.
would love your thoughts about podcasts as a medium, the future, where we've been, where we're going.
Yeah. So, I think how I would like contextualize the whole thing is that really we have been living through a grand media reformation. Since smartphones, streaming, just YouTube, things being able to be recorded. Recording is basically effortless and cheap and
Mm-hmm.
free. Uploading is basically effortless and free. And so a bunch of the assumptions that people had about media production of all kinds no longer apply. But the interesting thing is that, and you can look at the history of all media technologies here, that when the constraints drop, it still takes time for cultural attitudes to shift accordingly. Theoretically, Steven Spielberg could have done a podcast a decade ago, right? Or like
Yeah.
15 years ago. But it had to take this long because you needed audiences to adapt. You needed the prestige and attention and gatekeepers to catch on. Print magazine in the newsstand, documentaries and interviews and stuff. There were all these assumptions about what will people want to watch and what will people want to
Mm-hmm.
hear, and it had to appeal to everyone. And I'm now reminded of the large frozen pies. The most popular flavor was apple pie because you
Uh-huh.
would buy it.
Right.
It's not necessarily anybody's favorite flavor, but it's the one that like there's the least fights over. Everyone's kind of okay with apple pie. But then when you have like more flavors and they come in smaller sizes and everyone can have their own pies, like there's an explosion in blueberry and all these other flavors. And so it turns out that it's not that people loved apple pie individually, but that
Mm-hmm.
it was okay. And then now it
Yeah.
turns out that you can have really weird flavors potentially. And again, you can see it less. There's probably incentive for if you are starting a frozen pie company today, you might want to do outlandishly weird flavors that someone on
Yeah.
Instagram or TikTok might want to try and comment on, and you get attention that way. So like the incentives have changed. And
Mm-hmm.
similarly, like it makes perfect sense that Spielberg and any prominent player in media would be pivoting to going on podcasts because again they get to speak at much more length, so they get to go into much more detail about whatever it is that interests them. Now, my YouTube thing I like to do is I like to go look up like video game documentaries, and they can really get into the details of like I remember watching a like almost 10-20 minutes of when they made Oblivion, Elder Scrolls game, and it's just there's this long section of the guy who did like the trees and the leaves and how he would go to the actual forest to take photographs of all the
Mhm.
colors, and he's like, oh, video game foliage used to look bad because people thought it's all the same green, but if you actually
Mhm.
examine nature, there's many different shades, and like he's going into this for minutes and minutes and minutes, and
Yeah,
as I
yeah.
was watching this I'm like, huh, this is very interesting to me.
Yeah.
And there's no way I would have seen this on television years ago.
Yeah.
There's no, it's the stuff that would have been cut because
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like,
yeah,
well,
yeah.
we need to cover the main things. And it
Yeah,
turns
yeah,
out
yeah.
people are interested in all the details. It then selects, like you think about how there were people who were charismatic and popular in the silent film era
Mhm.
who once talking became a part of movies, the people who could speak well now could like outcompete the people who were charismatic in silence. And
Yeah.
similarly, I wonder if we are now going to see increasingly all media selecting for people who speak well on podcasts, people who can speak at length. Like there may have been actors who were really good at acting, but don't really have much to say about their process or about anything
Mhm.
else, and they are now going to be rightly or wrongly, right? It's just the nature of the constraints that we're in. They are not going to be as beloved as the authors who can speak beautifully about their process and their
Yeah.
colleagues and everything. So that's just really interesting to me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think 2 things kind of stand out about why I think this is happening. One being that, celebrities themselves want to control more of their narrative.
Hmm.
I don't know if you saw this recently, but this interview came out about Miles Teller. It
Yeah.
came across as him being like an asshole, right? And then so
Right.
they're calling him out, and he's like, you know what? I'm never doing these types of
Yeah.
interviews again for magazines because they get to take, whatever it is that I said and just like put a spin on it, right? One of the huge reasons why they like going on podcasts is because, like, generally, most podcasts you're not cutting and editing much out. It's just like a conversation that's going. So people are listening to like a full conversation without the
Right.
context of like the journalist, putting their spin on it of like, oh, he was doing this and this was happening.
Yeah.
So I see the allure of wanting
Mhm.
to go on these, podcasts. The other thing too is how many like the rise in celebrity podcasts, right?
Yes.
With Leonardo DiCaprio, like we mentioned, he went on The Big Picture, but the other one that he went on was The Heights with Jason and Travis Kelsey. And like, the main premise there is always going to be like they're not going to throw gotcha questions at you, right? Like they're not really trying to offend you. They're not going to bring up about how you only date 25-year-olds and you don't like do very many interviews. Like it's mostly like we want to talk about, fun stuff and like easygoing stuff for like you. And at first I was like, "Oh, yeah, like that makes sense, like, they would wanna do that." But when I actually listened to the interviews, I'm like, "When's the last time that I actually heard Leonardo DiCaprio talk about his process and, like, how he thinks about how he's gonna act in a scene and, like, how he, like, thinks about his relationship with directors and his coworkers," right? Like, um, it ended up giving me more insights into him and his process and, like, movies and movie making that, like, you wouldn't get from, like, journalists. And it's funny because that's all kind of falling out of favor is because they do seem to want to like be a little antagonistic to the
Yeah.
stars by asking them political questions or asking them like, questions that like, make them uncomfortable. And I see that also being a thing that's happening in like tech, right? Where it's like you have journalists that are, one can say antagonistic to like, the tech people. And you also see them kind of turning away. And then we're seeing the rise in tech podcasts and interviews, where it's like you can just go and have those like, friendly questions that are going to get asked, like talk about, the process. So I do wonder how that's going to like, change things going forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the incentives for like the journalism industry has been for a long time been like adversarial. Like, and it could even be that, you know, the journalist tries to write something thoughtful or have a thoughtful conversation, and then like their editor or whoever else cherry picks some
Yeah.
line from the interview to look bad. I remember there was one, I think it's an interview with Adam Levine, the Maroon 5 singer. It was a good interview, and like somewhere in there, he was asked about like the difference between bands when he was starting out versus bands now, and he was saying, he was making like a nuanced point about like discoverability and people, and then the quote that was used like in the tweets was like him saying that there are no bands anymore, which is
Oh,
obviously
okay.
untrue. And like it's obviously in context of a longer sentence, because no one would
Yeah.
say that by itself. But
Yeah.
you know, and the people who see the tweet and quote the tweet and insult him for the they don't care what he's actually said. But it became discourse for the day, and people were mocking him about it. And I was like,
Mhm.
wow, if I was that person and I said something in a conversation
Yeah.
and people were just like insulting me for a thing that I didn't actually say, like in context, like I would get so, I mean, you would either you would get really angry, or you would feel unsafe, or you would
Mhm,
be
mhm.
less trusting, and you would kind of end
Yeah.
up like closed off in your own little bubble of people who you think get it, and that has its own, you know,
Mhm,
challenges and
mhm, mhm.
costs. And you kind of understand why celebrities so easily go insane. Like it's just not,
Yeah.
people are not made to live like that. But yeah, I also hear what you're saying is that, like, you know, podcasts do give people more space to share like the wider context of everything that they're doing. Like again, like
Mhm,
if it's never been a better time to be interested in process, because people share
mhm.
so much detail about process. It's just like there's more process information now than you could probably get to, where previously we used to be starving and now we're drowning in so much of it. And yet, yeah, you also point out that like people go on podcasts to try and sell the narrative that they want to sell, which may or not necessarily, you know, have any bearing on the truth of what they're doing. You go on the podcast where you know you will not be challenged, and you know that, and so you can just have like hours long, like PR friendly chat, which I'm not. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Like you do get
Yeah,
to
yeah,
learn,
yeah.
you do get to inhabit it, and you do get to learn things. And you know, we're always telling on ourselves whether we realize it or not. So to the like, you know, serious listener who wants to get stuff out of what they're listening to, I think it's better now than ever before. But it doesn't magically erase like human nature problems, where like if someone is trying to bullshit people, they're still gonna do that.
Yeah.
I like where things are going. I do feel that things are more democratic. I think people have in fact already forgotten what it was like before. Like when I saw something very interesting recently about where someone was saying it was a Trevor Noah podcast snippet. He was explaining that um in the past, you would, if you want to be successful as a musician, you have to go to
Oh,
your
yes, 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 I
label,
saw
and
that.
your label will go to the radio station, and they will tell the radio station, oh, you should play this guy a lot, and we will back you, and we will pay you or whatever, and
Mhm, mhm.
that's how it works. And then he says now what they do is they have these services online where you basically pay people for get driving views to your song. So if they don't get you any views, you don't have to pay them. And so Trevor Noah was describing this as though in the past it was okay, and now
I know.
it's fake. But I'm
Yeah.
like, it's performance marketing. You're paying for results, and
Yeah.
you're not gonna be able to like just throw money at something and make it viral. Like, and the guest that he was talking to was saying, oh, these people got this idea from politics, and they're
Politics,
talking
yeah.
like, and like, yeah, it's true. We were there when, you know, Obama was like the first online campaign. But even so, you know, you look at, let's say, like Bloomberg, I think for his campaign, he threw a ton of money at it and like
Mhm.
didn't really get
I mean,
anywhere
we're
with it.
seeing it right now with, like, Spencer Pratt here in LA,
Yeah.
right? With,
Mhm.
like, all the
Right.
clipping that's coming from all the
Yeah.
podcasts he's doing, and then the
Right.
AI videos that he's doing, like,
Yeah.
it's definitely, a thing, and that's part of what the other part of, this where, with these podcasts, just the distribution of it,
Mhm.
right? It's like now it's like you
Right.
have the episode that lives on,
Mhm.
like, Netflix or YouTube or whatever, but
Mhm.
then the whole point is you're cutting it into, like,
Yeah.
snippets,
Yeah.
that, is what goes viral on
Yeah.
social media.
Yeah.
I feel like with when they appear, they're doing like the press junkets with
Hmm.
like, late night shows. I hardly ever see that now,
Right.
which is funny because, what's his name? The Colbert, show was finally canceled. And it's like, oh,
Right.
one of the reasons was that, right? It's just like
Yeah.
that, falling viewership.
Right.
And then you're seeing this rise in like podcasts because it's like,
Right.
oh, you're able to have those like niche topics where like if you want to go promote your movie to like
Hmm.
movie fans,
Hmm.
you go to like the podcast that like,
Right.
is directly, speaking to those movie audiences,
Mhm.
so it just
Right.
makes so much more sense to be using, podcasts to go out there and promote your work. So definitely expect that to start taking over, the late night shows or, magazines, because this is just so much, easier to target the audience
Right.
that you want to go after.
For listeners who don't know about the backstory, the COVID backstory is very interesting because
Mhm.
the phrase "cancel culture" basically got popularized when when Stephen Colbert was doing an episode about like cultural insensitivity, and he had his Twitter account tweet. So he was performing a racist character on his TV show, and then his Twitter account would tweet what he was saying on the TV show, but the tweets don't have any context, so it looks like a racist tweet. Like,
Sure.
and then the backlash to the racist tweet was cancel Colbert, and then that went super
Uh,
viral, and it was like, they were trying to get his show canceled, and the activist who was leading that charge, Sui Park, she got a lot of like death threats and all that stuff. She was basically driven off the internet. So it's like at the time I remember thinking, oh, it's kind of funny because Sui like helped to make cancel Colbert go viral, but she didn't get that successful. She kind of canceled herself in a way, and then ultimately, like you could say that she ultimately succeeded like a decade and a half later, but like the show got cancelled not for racism or controversy. Just people just lost interest, and it's just they were spending too much money and they're not getting a return on the investment. It's like just boring economics outcome, and I feel like this is a pattern so much in the world
yeah.
where people want things to be because of like grand narratives, and like grand narratives are interesting and relevant, but like when the underlying economics changes, that's usually when like things go out of business, and then it just like no fanfare, it just kind of quietly goes out, right? Like I remember,
Yeah.
I think similarly, Disney had a massive drop in their streaming something something, and everyone was like,
Uh-huh.
oh, is it because of woke, oh, is it because of the princesses? And it turns out
Uh-huh.
like there was some technical deal with like Disney was for a while getting licensing for a huge amount of like Indian cricket streaming or something, and there's like hundreds of millions of people signed up for that, and then that fell
That's
off
so
for some
funny.
technical reason, but then the people who say, oh, it's because of woke, like they get to have their day in the sun because it looks like it, right? If you want to believe, so it's all very funny and chaotic and circus like, where again, if you really want to get to the bottom of things, you can go and look it up and figure it out. But like I guess for the average person who views everything as entertainment, like so even just trying to whatever news events, it's not going to affect you personally probably. So it's just entertainment, and you just believe what you want to believe and you say what you want to say. But it all
Yeah.
kind of shakes out in the end. So we'll see. It's funny.
That's funny. Okay, let's round that out with lessons. A huge lesson here is that
Right.
podcasts are here to
Yeah.
stay. If
Yeah.
a 78-year-old Hollywood legend like
Correct.
Steven Spielberg decides to
Right.
go onto a podcast to promote his movie,
Yeah.
instead of doing late night shows or magazines, then like
Right.
the format is here. So what is it that you can do in terms of that? Like,
Yeah.
is it that you can start getting your founders or, the like people that are like knowledgeable in your company to start going out to like podcasts? There's so many like niche podcasts these days. Like, can you start using them to promote your product, to promote your people, show them
Right.
off as like thought leaders? Um, and
Yeah.
then, on the flip side, like, is there a way that like it might make sense for you and your company to start a podcast with
Hmm.
like a very niche or like narrow topic that like talks about the industry and that could be of interest to, your target audience or if you're doing like B2B, like,
Right.
other companies that are in the same space so that like you become known as like the go-to place to have like these conversations. I think we're learning more and more that people really like to nerd out on the things that they're super passionate about.
Right.
Um, obviously, for Steven Spielberg, it's about movies and
Yeah.
directing, but, within your industry, what are those topics that really get people, talking? And that could be like a way for you to create content out there. And then the last one is just, yeah, the clips are like the real distribution here, right? Where it's like just getting those like 30 to like 90-second clips are what's making this interview go viral. And I'm seeing it all over my timeline because people are
Yeah.
just interested in him geeking out about like, his relationship with Stanley Kubrick and, talking about ET and like how he directs celebrities. So it's just like really interesting conversations that, nobody else is really having out there. So what are those things that you can be doing for yourself?
Yeah, so even before podcasts were really taking off, and even before AI and all these things, like I remember very early on, like when came online as a kid, and I saw like the fact that you could publish by yourself online, like anything you want, you can just write whatever you want online. I was drawn to that like spiritually, like I just wanted to, because
Hmm.
I read books as a kid and I wanted to contribute to that endeavor of reading and writing, but I didn't know any publishers or editors, or like where do I go to start writing a book or whatever. And then when I encountered the internet, I'm like, oh, you can just publish blog posts and tweets and whatever. And I was
Hmm.
just over, it was so obviously to me back then the thing to do. And I was preaching to everyone I could, like, you should start a blog, you should tweet, you should vlog, you should do whatever.
Hmm.
And it's aged so beautifully because, like, for a long time I think I encountered a lot of people who were like, well, I don't know if this is good enough, or I don't know if people will be interested in this, or I'm scared of not, and there's a full spectrum of I don't know what to say versus I don't have anything to say, and like I have so much to say, but like I don't know how to edit it. And like you really almost don't need to edit things anymore. And like you can just ramble everything you have,
Yeah.
and like you can get AIs to read the transcript, or you can get other people. It's just everyone I know who was prolific before and was overwhelmed with I don't know how to get people to I don't know how to write a good introduction for my stuff, or I don't know how to get
Hmm.
people into my body of work. Like those problems are getting solved now. And and we are still in the early days. It's still a great time to start a new podcast, start a new blog, whatever. And the payoffs tend to take longer than people would like. People would like it if they could do 3 podcast episodes and then get traffic,
Yeah.
get users, get money, whatever. And it takes a while. It takes like at least
Yeah.
at least a year, and you have to be understanding that while it's easier than ever to make stuff, it's people are also overwhelmed, and so a lot of people use longevity as a filter. So like if someone says they're starting a podcast, and then like you might just ignore it for a year, right? And then when you see that they're still doing it a year later, 2 years later, you're like, okay, I guess they're serious.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll check it out now. And this isn't like a personal attack on anyone. Like everyone's just overwhelmed. Everyone has a stack of books they want to read,
So much to
movies they want to
do.
watch. There's just
Yeah.
infinite stuff of everything. But each individual's perspective is valuable. It just takes time for people to warm up to it. So yeah, I highly recommend everyone share whatever you're thinking, talk to people if you can, like just keep going, and like it all shakes out in the end.
Yeah, definitely. And as you're doing it, you're learning so much, right? Like,
Yes.
I mean, I've been doing this for a little over a year now.
Right.
And it's, I've learned so much. I've become a better like speaker. I've learned how to like
Mm.
wrap my head around my ideas a little bit better. So just even if you're doing it for yourself to like
Yeah.
improve, your own skills and like, I talk to really cool people. That's been like one of like the greatest things about this is like
Mm.
most people that I, ask to come on, like they say yes. And it's like we
Yeah.
have like a really amazing conversations and I learned so much from, other people that like think about things differently. So it's like a really cool space.
Yeah,
So
and
agree with everything
you
you're
have
saying.
a conversation with someone once, and it can live forever, and you can share it with somebody else. Like so, like you might have a record a podcast with someone, and then forget about it, and then like 2 years later have a conversation with someone else, and then be like, wait, I could send you this thing, and you can
Yeah.
get into it, like you can listen to it on the drive home or whatever, and it gets into all the stuff that you would want to talk about and stuff like that. There's many
Yeah, yeah,
many different
definitely.
versions of things like that. It's just amazing.
Yeah, yeah.